In 2019, the median wealth for white households with children sat at $63,828. For Black households with children, that number was $808. That specific ratio, where Black child households hold roughly 1 cent for every dollar held by white counterparts, is not a recent development. The disparity matches figures last seen 6 decades ago. This simplified bar chart compares wealth gaps across demographics. It reveals a statistical paradox. The racial wealth disparity is mathematically larger among households with children than it is for the general population. Decades of conventional policy responses, from civil rights legislation to modern safety net programs, have failed to close this specific child-household gap. In contemporary economic and public policy debates, proposals to address this through direct wealth transfers are almost exclusively framed as adult-focused compensation. A working paper from the National Bureau of Economic Research by Lisa Genetician, Christina Gibson Davis, and William Darity proposes a structural pivot. They argue for a shift from that adult-focused model to a strictly child-centric framework. Their thesis is straightforward. Until economic models account for the sensitive developmental window of early childhood, public policy will continually fail to sever the intergenerational transmission of poverty. To measure intergenerational mobility, economists use the classical human capital production function. The X and H variables represent inputs and endowments, showing how time and money directly feed into a child's future output. While this framework accurately maps contemporary financial behavior, it contains a systemic blind spot. Look at the epsilon variable. The model treats all unobserved shocks equally. It cannot accurately map the compounding, multi-generational impacts of systemic racial injustice. Classical human capital theory is also mathematically insensitive to the precise developmental timing of an intervention. Receiving a financial transfer at age 3 triggers compound cognitive and sibling multiplier effects that simply do not occur if that exact same amount is introduced at age 16. An economic equation alone cannot accurately predict Black-white developmental gaps because it assumes a sterile environment, entirely disconnected from historical wealth extraction. Researchers upgrade the equation by layering it inside Bronfenbrenner's bioecological model. It embeds the child within nested systems, starting with the family system. Here, historical trauma and family stress shape parenting strategies. We then expand outward to cultural context and systemic history. That outer layer represents how legal, regulatory, and systemic structures act as constant downward pressures on the inner family system. To demonstrate the real-world friction caused by these outer layers, researchers curated 25 distinct developmental outcomes. Plotting 25 outcomes against a baseline 0 reveals a uniform block of negative metrics across every life stage, from a 55% higher likelihood of low birth weight in infancy to stark disparities in childhood math proficiency and double the rates of adolescent school suspensions. Historical harm operates as an active, measurable variable, continuously suppressing human capital at every developmental transition. We are observing a recurring mechanical failure within the economic environment. Historical data from the Survey of Consumer Finances Plus maps this suppression. Since the Great Recession, the Black-white child household wealth gap widened significantly. This divergence is driven entirely by a lack of asset accumulation, while differences in household debt remain flat. 4 contemporary structural drivers maintain this gap. The first is unequal starting endowments, caused by historically suppressed grandparent wealth transfers. The second driver is structural labor market constraints. Occupational segregation restricts the access to benefits and disposable income required for Black parents to save. Third, the rising financial demands of modern intensive parenting norms drastically amplify those existing investment gaps. And the fourth driver is systemic wealth extraction, executed through disproportionate incarceration rates and targeted legal financial obligations. When a parent interacts with the criminal justice system, families are frequently forced to liquidate hard assets just to survive economically. The racial wealth gap for children is actively maintained by these contemporary structural forces, negating any possibility of passive correction over time. To address these bioecological failures, the researchers outline a 3-pronged, child-centric strategy. The first prong is a direct financial payment deposited into an individual trust fund, locked until the child reaches the age of maturity. The trust is locked specifically to prevent crowd-out. This specifically ensures that parents do not adjust or reduce their own contemporaneous private investments in light of the child's future wealth. Similar mechanisms are already gaining traction in federal policy discussions regarding wealth inequality, specifically through legislative proposals for early childhood endowments, like baby bonds. The second prong is a simultaneous one-time wealth infusion at the family level. Stabilizing the immediate household environment ensures that the child's future endowment isn't undermined by present-day crises. The third prong requires federal funding for systemic redress. Historical compensation trusts have established legal precedents, like the compensation accounts established by the U.S. for displacement harm in the Marshall Islands. This specific three-pronged approach serves as a mathematically targeted capital injection, engineered to protect current stability while securing future mobility. The researchers quantitatively tested this framework using longitudinal data from the panel study of income dynamics. This line graph plots baseline human capital attainment. The simulation models a hypothetical wealth transfer of $130,000 per child, injected during the critical developmental window between ages 0 and 4. The model predicts under these parameters, the black-white high school graduation gap would shrink by 13 percentage points. Furthermore, college attendance rates would increase by 26 percentage points. Securing this magnitude of human capital attainment permanently alters the lifetime earning trajectory of the child, eliminating the need for further intervention downstream. When viewed through a bioecological lens, early childhood reparations stand as the most precise policy tool available